they really knew me, they couldn't love me. No, the truth is, when I really unpacked it, it was me that didn't love me.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Coming Clean Podcast. This is your host, Peter O. Estevez. Thank you for being with us one more time this week, and thank you for supporting us each and every week. Today, we have Tana Amen, a New York Times bestselling author, a vice president at the Amen Clinics, and a neurosurgical ICU trauma nurse, a world-renowned health fitness expert. She's won the hearts of millions of people across by her simple yet effective strategies to help anyone optimize their lifestyle and win the fight for a strong body, mind, and spirit. Tana, thank you for being with us today. How are you?
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Peter.
Tana, you have an upcoming book that I'm really, really excited about, The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child.
Yes, I'm really excited. It comes out January 5th.
Congratulations, but you look nothing like a scared child.
Not anymore.
You're a vibrant, beautiful, attractive, elegant woman, full of energy, positivity. Where was that scared child? Because there's not a trace of it anymore.
Thank you so much. So yeah, it took a lot of work. So I grew up in a pretty chaotic, toxic environment. And I know a lot of people probably listening to your podcast. I follow you. I love your Instagram page. Most likely a lot of people listening to this came from similar backgrounds or at least know something about it. They've got someone in their family who does. So, when you grow up in that kind of an environment, that's where the scared child came from, that term. But you learn to hide. So, children, when they're young, the job of your family or your parents, if you will, is to create this safe environment, to create a feeling of safety and security so that a child has the ability to go out and explore the world, to gain confidence. But if you don't have that, you begin to hide. You begin to withdraw. And so because it's not safe to do, and that's kind of what happened, was that learning to withdraw, to think that the world is not safe. When your early memories stack and all of those memories are fearful of survival, then that's what you start to think, is that the world is not a safe place.
It's very interesting parallels between your story and my story. And yes, our audience is an audience that relates a lot to those type of stories. And I have often say that I share my story, not because it's unique, but because it's a story of many. There's many of us that go in silence through life, and we try to battle and hide things and create multiple masks of dysfunction. And at some point we crack. And that's what happened to me. I cracked through alcohol. I cracked through seeking success, power, you name it, but it was not facing myself. The reality is the more we run from ourselves, the closer we get to us.
Yes.
There was
everything you're saying just sounds so right on target. So the only difference between what you're saying and what I'm saying was my choice of addiction. So because of my environment growing up, where my uncle was a heroin addict, there was a lot of addiction in my family, a lot of mental health issues. I didn't choose that. So for me, that was terrifying, because I thought of my uncle literally like the Walking Dead, like a zombie. And I was so scared of him. He says the one thing he's proud of today is that he created shock therapy for me and kept me away from drugs. But I still, like you said, when you are not comfortable with yourself, when you're not happy internally, when you don't address those broken parts of yourself, it comes out somewhere. And so for me, it was perfectionism. It was trying to control that environment I couldn't control. Everything just felt out of control. I developed this, this extreme need for control and perfectionism, and it ended up coming out in the form of an eating disorder. It ended up coming out in, just in different unhealthy ways that I didn't really recognize. And like you said, I could so relate to you in needing to accomplish. So everything about me was based on my physical appearance, eating disorder, and the more that I could accomplish, the more I felt validated. So I thought. It's like I didn't feel complete unless I could do everything perfectly. But good luck with that, because that only holds up for so long. So I had this wall, this facade. And you say that there's no trace of that scared child. For a long time, I didn't look like a scared child, but it was a facade. It was a wall. I was so broken inside. And so people didn't really know it, because there was a pretty decent looking package on the outside of success, of fitness, of all these things that I kept stacking, you know, hair, makeup, clothes, whatever I could to mask it, until it just crashed, until it just, the dam broke. And then you've got no choice. And at that point, you've got two choices. You either are a victim or you figure out how to make it actually work.
Is there still any brokenness in you?
Oh, I think there's probably brokenness in all of us. I think the difference now is that I embrace it. The difference now is that I realize that everybody's got broken pieces. My favorite form of art is called kintsugi. It's a Japanese art form of broken pottery. I end my book with this story. Yeah, so I end my book with this story. It's my favorite art form. I actually keep my dad's ashes. You can't see it because it's above me. My dad's ashes in a kintsugi urn because we did not get along. We did not have a relationship. He abandoned me when I was a baby. But in the end, I tell the story in my book about how we have this beautiful healing moment right before he dies. He dies in my arms with me praying for him. And we have this chance to heal everything. And so, and I come to grips with this idea that, you know, his life was as messy as mine, and that's why he made some of the decisions he did. And so I was able to just let it all go. So, you know, God had called me to help him, and the help was for him, but the healing was for me. But I put his ashes in that kintsugi urn to remind me. Because what kintsugi is this art form of mending broken pottery. So the Japanese do that because they don't want to throw the pottery away. They mend broken pottery with gold or platinum. And each one of those breaks actually tells a story. And they think the pottery is more valuable and more beautiful, not in spite of the breaks, but because of that. Because each one of those breaks tells this story.
Wow.
And so it's my favorite form of art because it reminds me that we all have broken pieces. And yeah, every time you mend one, you're going to end up with another one at some point. You're going to lose someone. You're going to come up, you know, across some challenge. Something's going to happen. COVID happens. I mean, something happens. But it's being able to embrace it and not feel like because you have a broken piece, it's the end of the world for you. It's failure. It's not failure. It's just a broken piece.
Absolutely. I want to touch back a little bit on your father because there was an interview that you did and you talked about how the relationship with your father had closed the opportunity for you to have a relationship with God because you looked at, you would think, how if my father did this, how could God do that? And that really touched me because I remember I got sober through a 12-step program of recovery through Alcoholics Anonymous. Right. And I remember the very first time that I did what's called a 3rd-step prayer, which is a prayer where we, you know, your sponsor, your mentor prays with you and asks you to surrender. And I did that, and it was the very first time that I was able to have a healthy connection with a man. Okay, that it was not something that I was repulsed by, that it was not something that I was that didn't hurt me, didn't bother me, because I used to think, you know, our Father as God, and then my father as a linear connection to God, and it was very difficult for me to be able to have a relationship with God if I saw my father being a pedophile, being an abuser, being a, you know, and it took me a long time to be able to heal that relationship. And I heard you share something similar to that. Now, where are you today in your spirituality or your beliefs?
I love that question, but I also want to just take one moment and just acknowledge that scared, hurt child that you just mentioned. So
thank you.
Congratulations for being where you're at. So my dad left when I was a baby, and he was doing drugs with my uncle, the heroin addict. And then he showed up years later with a new wife, a pretty new wife, who I actually liked and I still am connected with. Really cared about her. But my dad, I never got along with. When he showed up again, he was a Baptist minister all of a sudden. So here's this guy who abandoned me, he left, and then he comes back and he's a Baptist minister, but he was like really not kidding about it, like hellfire and brimstone. You are going to hell if you do all of these things. You listen to music, you know, there was this huge list of how I was going to go to hell. And at the same time, he's telling me about this savior in white robes. And I'm a kid. I'm just a little kid. And I'm like, hold on. I'm supposed to be terrified of what this message you're giving me. You're telling me about a savior in white robes, but you can't even show up. You can't even be here for me. Like through all of these horrible things that are going on in my life, you're not there. So why am I going to listen to this message that you're trying to tell me? Like I was pretty resentful about it. And so I got very confused about who God was, what it meant. And then over time, just with all the the stacked stressors going on in my life, especially through my teens and my early 20s, when I went into a wicked depression after being diagnosed with cancer, I thought, if there is a God, he doesn't love me. Why should I love him? I highly doubted there was one. But if there was, I just thought, it finally ended with that really just terrible place in my life. And it was in the most broken point in my life that I finally found the mentors that changed my life forever. They say when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Some of us need to be a little more broken than other people.
Yeah,
So
yes.
I'm one of those people. My life had gone pretty much off the rails. And so at the point that it went totally off the rails, and I was so depressed that I kept just wishing I could die. Just thought I was wasting oxygen on the planet. There is no point. I was, like I said, wicked depression, cancer, lost the only things that were important to me at the time. I thought that I was valued for my appearance. And without that, what was I? I was nothing. And so I got really confused about what people expected of me and who I now thought I was supposed to be, how I was valued in the world. And so I came to need the thing I hated growing up, that validation.
Sure.
And when that went away, I was lost. And at the same time, I filed for bankruptcy, lost my job, had to drop out of school. My mother had brain surgery, and just my whole world crashed. And so at that time, I went to a psychiatrist. They put me on Prozac, wrong drug for my brain. I went from being a super anxious person trying to control everything in my life to being dangerously impulsive and didn't care about anything.
Wow.
Just did not care, did not feel, and made a lot of decisions that were frightening. So for about the next 8 months, I made decisions that could have ruined the rest of my life. Fortunately, I was able to sort of bounce back from that. But it was a really hard time in my life. And it was during that time that two people came into my life that really helped me understand not only God in a whole new way, but myself. One of them was my uncle, the heroin addict.
Really?
So yeah, full circle moment. I tell the story in my book, and it's one of my favorite stories. So we're actually pretty close now. We weren't when I was growing up. And so, because he scared me, and I didn't have a reason, even after he cleaned up, I had no reason to be connected to this person. He just terrified me when I was growing up, him and his weird friends and their weird music and breaking in my house, making it unsafe. And, so now all of a sudden, fast forward, and I'm in my 20s and I'm at rock bottom. He's cleaned up his life. He is volunteering time at juvenile hall. He's coaching people. He's doing all these cool things. He's teaching this self-help seminar in Hawaii. And he calls me. My mom tells me, what's going on in my life. And he calls me and he says, hey, I want you to come out. I want you to do this seminar with me in Hawaii. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no self-help seminar with me right now. I'm beyond all that. But I could be just the right thing. So I take him up on it and I go out there, and he helped me more than any seminar did, to be honest with you. He taught me one word that changed everything in my life. And it literally is my favorite word to this day. And no matter how bad someone's got it in their life, I promise you, this word will help you, but you have to hear it for what it means, not for what you think it means. The word was responsibility. He looked at me and he said, how much responsibility are you willing to take for where your life is at? I'm like, for cancer? That wasn't my idea of a good time. And I went on a few more things. I'm like, my stepdad climbing in bed, that wasn't my idea of a good time. These things weren't my fault. And I started to go on and list all the things that weren't my fault. He said, I never asked you to take the blame. I asked you how much responsibility you're willing to take for your life, which means the ability to respond. How much ability to respond do you want? And I literally almost fell out of my chair. I just never heard it put that way. He said, responsibility doesn't mean blame. It doesn't mean that that you were to blame for any of the bad things that happened in your life. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that you have the ability to respond in a different way, to be empowered enough to make a change so that you can change the outcome. And he said, if you want to take 50% right now, then you'll have 50 more percent ability to change the outcome than you have now. But someone else still has the other 50%, someone or something else.
Ouch.
And I'm like, I don't want anyone else to have that. I want to have 100%. And from that moment on, every time something bad happens. COVID, someone in my family getting sick. I mean, does not matter. My own health. I mean, I've had 10 medical surgeries. Cancer came back twice after that. I look in the mirror and I'm like, what's the opportunity? What can I do? What do I get to do? Doesn't mean I never have bad days.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tana, how is it that a woman that perhaps would have continued to live as a victim, that assaulted by your stepfather at the age of 12, assaulted by estrangement at the age of 15, abandoned by your father, and then you go and meet the world-renowned psychiatrist? How did that go?
Yeah. So initially,
I would think that would be the person that you would want to stay away from, right?
I did. I tried to cancel my first date with him, actually. I almost canceled my first date with him, but he was so nice. And I thought, oh, okay. He's just such a nice person. I'm just going to get through this date. I also never answered your question about spirituality. I want to come back to that in a second. I kind of got sidetracked. But to answer this question, when I met Daniel, he was so nice. He really is the person that you see when you see him speak, when you hear him on podcast. He's that person. He's very authentic. But in my mind, we don't see the world the way the world is. We see it the way we are. And so I was so jaded when I met him, and I had this very clean facade. I had this very, very strong wall up that people couldn't see through for the most part. But I didn't want to date him because I thought if anyone's going to see through it, it's going to be a psychiatrist. I didn't have a ton of respect for psychiatry anyways because of what I had been through. And so I was going to cancel my date with him. And he just wouldn't go away. So I mean, he didn't stalk me, but he didn't go away. And he just kept seeing the best in me. Quite honestly, he just saw the best in me, which is what he tends to do anyways with everybody. And so I'm like, okay, dude, I'm trying to tell you something. Like, I'm a mess. I'm doing you a favor. You need to go away. And I literally would just like push him away and he wouldn't go. And so, it was a rocky road at first because I knew I couldn't trust him if I couldn't trust my own judgment. I was at least evolved enough at that point to know it's not so much about other people anymore. It's really about me, but I'm not to that place where I can trust my own judgment. If I can't trust my own judgment, I can't trust him. And so I just kept waiting for the other shoe to fall. I kept waiting for him. I thought he was manipulating. Really? So I finally decided it was time to do my own work. And during this process, he was just so kind, so loving, so supportive. He created this amazing safe space. And I'd love to tell you it was just this amazing love story that happened, love at first sight, and that was it. Nope, that wasn't it. I didn't believe in fairy tales. I didn't believe in happy endings. I was going to make sure that didn't happen. So I broke up with him a couple times, actually. And then we became best friends while I was going through my healing journey. And he allowed me to do that. He was so unselfish that it's not what he wanted. He allowed me to go through this process of healing, of just going through what I needed to go through. He was my best friend, even though it's not what he wanted to do. And it was when he was my best friend, I told him everything. I mean, I thought if I can't scare this guy off now, and I told him the worst things about me while I was doing all of that. And he just loved me more. And so it was really then that I began to trust him. And I realized he really is who he says he is. And I just fell head over heels in love with him.
He's also the one that encouraged you to seek a relationship with your father again.
He did.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So I want to touch back on what you said. My spiritual relationship finally did get strong. At the same time I met my uncle, I met an amazing woman who became she's like my second mother. She became my spiritual mentor. And through that process of just, again, she was very similar to my husband. Non-judgmental, non-threatening, the opposite message I had heard growing up of hellfire and brimstone. Everything about her was just about love, forgiveness, acceptance. And I'm like, yeah, I'll come back when I get my life together. She's like, no, you don't get clean to get in the shower. She's like, that's not how it works. You start right where you're at. God loves you no matter what. And I was like, what? No, not the God I heard about. But it was through that process I began to understand. I developed my own relationship with God. And I really had this epiphany. My dad's not God. And I know that sounds really simple and stupid.
No. It doesn't, because I had the same epiphany. I had the same realization when I was kneeling with my sponsor at Alcoholics Anonymous. He holds my hand, and it was almost like a weird feeling. And I thought to myself, wow, I had never had that kind of an intimacy with a person like that. And he's holding my hand, this man 2 times my age. and you know, we're praying together, and it was the very first time that I realized this is humanity. This is what it means to have a connection with someone. And it was the very first time that I realized my father's not God. He was just a human.
Yes, that was my exact thought. He's a flawed human. Why am I expecting him to be like God? Why am I always waiting for God to disappoint me because my dad disappointed me? And when I finally developed that relationship, for me, my relationship was critical. My spiritual walk was critical because I felt so broken and so low, and I'd messed up so many things in my life by that point. I thought I knew some pretty powerful people. I was walking in the fast lane for a while. Let's just leave it at that. But made a lot of bad decisions, and some of my trauma was self-induced, if you will. But I realized, you know, there's no one that's going to pull me out of this hole. It's going to be me, but it's going to take someone bigger than me or any other person I know to help me do it. And there's no person that's going to do that. So that's when I really realized it's going to take something supernatural. And so I developed that spiritual walk, and that really helped me. So now fast forward, you asked me the question about my dad.
Right.
Coming back into my life, and it's my husband. If you don't want to heal yourself, and you don't want to heal your relationships with your crazy family that you've cut off ties with, do not marry a psychiatrist. That's all I can say. So this man has hope for everybody. And you know, there are some things where I had drawn these like really hard boundaries, but I hadn't really figured out how to loosen the boundaries to the point where it's like, yes, I can let some people in, and some people I need to love from a distance. I thought that it had to be all or nothing for everybody. And so I'd really pushed everyone away except for my mother. And so nobody's getting through. That's how it was. And that's the only way I felt safe. So when my husband said, no, we have to have your dad come. He'd been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. He was a recluse. He wouldn't come out of his room. No one else could afford to take care of him. And I'm like, not my monkey, not my circus. This isn't my problem. He was never there for me. I don't need to be there for him. I'm going through this terrible divorce, finally dating someone that I really, really like, getting my life together, going through therapy, dealing with all this stuff, and I'm a single mom on top of that. I don't have time for this dude that left me when I was a kid. Like, I don't hate him anymore, but I don't have time for him.
Right.
And so I've forgiven him, but that was enough in my mind.
Yes.
And Daniel's like, no, it's not enough. And so I'm like, so he comes down and we scan him, and he didn't have Alzheimer's disease. He had something called 𝗔𝗩𝗔𝗕𝗦𝗪. He was very, very depressed, and he was on a toxic cocktail of medications that was masquerading as Alzheimer's disease. And so now Daniel's like, he needs to live with you so we can get him well. And I'm like, excuse me? So I thought I misheard him at first. But this happened, and so I write this story in my book. It's a chapter titled The Prodigal Father, because once again, I have this epiphany that there's like so many learning lessons for me along my life. And that's what I really wanted the book to be about, was about hope. But so often God has called me to help people that I didn't want to help. And then I realized later, like I had resisted and pushed away, you know, hence there's in the subtitle, The Reluctant Healer. Sure. I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't understand that the help was for them, but the healing was actually for me. And I almost denied myself that opportunity to heal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, you keep referring us to your healing process. What was that process, Tana? What is it that you have done over the years to get you where you're at today? Because as I started our conversation, there's not a trace of a broken child or a broken woman for that matter.
Thank you so much. So it was a process. That's exactly right. I think, you know, like I said earlier, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And so there was a process that occurred. It didn't all happen overnight. There's no magic pill. I wish there was, but there's not. So the first thing was learning responsibility for me. Second thing was taking responsibility. And that meant even for my own spiritual walk, for what that meant to me, getting my life back together, you know, with my career, all those things. But then there was the next level. It was addressing the demons from the past that I just hadn't been willing to do.
And I want to talk about, that's the area that I care about, because I think a lot of us think that we go out and get the job, we go out and, you know, marry the husband or the wife and do whatever we need to do, and we leave the demons unattended. We kind of hide them until they come back out. So tell us about those demons and how did you handle them?
Yeah, no, I thought everything was pretty good because like I got the spiritual life, I've got financially, I'm secure, you know, went to school to have responsibility in my life now, everything's good. But then it wasn't, and it started to fester inside. And I had my daughter, she was a baby, She was 2 when I met Daniel, and things are not, they're just not going right. You know, my relationships aren't right. And I know it's not right, but I don't really know what to do about it. I'm hiding it all. And so all of a sudden these demons they're like starting to rear their heads. And I'll never forget the day my daughter we've always said she was a 45-year-old soccer mom trapped in a little body. She's got this wisdom like way beyond her years, and she had insane speech. But I remember her looking at me when she was really young, and she's like, "Mommy, people look at you different." And I'm like, "What do you mean, honey?" She's like you're shiny. And I'm not exactly sure what she meant, but the way I took that was, she's like, "They don't look at you like other mommies." And I'm like, I took that to mean they see my facade. They can't get through it. Sure. And so for some reason, it struck me so hard. My husband had given me this gift of 10 sessions of EMDR, and I sort of wasn't doing it. I'm like, okay, who gives you a gift of therapy? Okay, so only a psychiatrist does that. So I hadn't really done anything with it yet, but when she did that, it struck me so hard. And I realized I was about to do the same thing that I had promised myself I wouldn't do. I was going to repeat the cycle. Maybe I'd have more money. Maybe I wouldn't leave her alone like I had been left alone. Maybe she wouldn't be a latchkey kid, but I was going to put her through the same toxic thought process, the same environment that I had grown up in without even wanting to.
A perpetrator is a perpetrator is a perpetrator, just disguised in a different costume. I completely agree. You have no idea the nerve that you had touched with that.
And for some reason, it was like a slap in the face. That little girl saying that to me was like, she was going to become that scared child that I was when I was little. And I'm like, no, as scared as I am to address all these demons, now is the time. Now is the time for me to because she's going to take on, this need to be perfect all the time. Yeah, she's going to take on, kids don't do what you say, they do what you do.
Yeah, she's going to adopt a persona.
Mm-hmm. She's going to think that she can't be real. She's going to think she has to have a facade. She's going to think she has to have accomplishments. And she already has some of that. But I bust her on it every time now. You know what I mean? Like I'm always calling her. We have these amazing talks. And I'm like, so what would happen if you got a B? Oh my God, the world's going to end. Oh, that would really suck. And so we have these amazing talks, but I catch her. I'm able to be a different kind of coach for her now. So because we're programmed to want to do that, especially as women, we want to be perfect. But now Daniel and I are able to like guide her through that process in a different way. If I was still that same person I was back then, I'd have been like, yeah, why did you get a B? Try harder, work harder.
Right.
Right. And so that was my motivation to get well. And it took a couple years and it was painful and it got worse before it got better. So.
Tana, you said something in another interview that you assume that the way your life, your background, where you came from was normal. And when you talk to Daniel or Dr. Amen about this, Dr. Amen said, that is not normal. Wait a minute. And I think a lot of times, because I know it's happened to me, I came from very humble beginnings. And that's all as I started moving through life and gaining success and resources, I still had the same mentality, the same belief, but I was playing this field where I pretend everything was normal. So I was almost caught in between the wall where I wasn't really on this side, but I wasn't on the other side. And I couldn't really share my story, because if I share my story, how were they going to look at me? Were they still going to accept me? Was I still going to be successful? I think one of the reasons that I started the podcast, as a matter of fact, was because I grew up, when I started sobriety, it was anonymous. And I thought to myself, why do I want to be anonymous? Everybody knew I was a drunk, and I'm hiding the fact that I'm doing something about my life.
Right.
So
that's a really good point. I love that. So everyone knew you were drunk, but you're going to be anonymous about your sobriety.
Yeah. Yeah. And at some point I'm sitting in a meeting, I'm hearing everybody talk, and it didn't make sense to me. I said, my story's not to stay in this room. It's not to die in this room. It's not doing anybody any good.
I love that.
My stories need to be shared so I can give someone else permission. And that's what you're doing with your book. That's what you're doing with your stories. That's what you're doing with your videos. You're giving other women, men, and children permission to share their story and to realize that there's possibilities, that there's something beyond the surface, that we are deeper than we want to be. Now, let me tell you, because this is a question that I often ask, and I notice with a lot of the guests, when I ask them the questions, they kind of look at me and they say, well, what do you, I mean, like that's almost like a dumb question. But the reality is that when you are in where you were, in that state of despair, in that state of brokenness, in that state of dysfunction, okay? And this is not just you. You are carrying multiple generational cycles of that dysfunction, okay? It's very hard for other people to understand that that's where you come from. Mm-hmm. It's very hard for someone like Dr. Amen to say, well, that's not normal, but that was normal to you.
Right.
Okay. So how is it that we are able to open the light, open the window, open the door of opportunity for other people to be able to see, no, that is not normal. And yes, there is possibility. And yes, you can break the cycle. You're doing it for your daughter. The best example that you could have done is saying, no, you don't have to be strong. You don't have to be charming. You know, you can be who you are. So how do we do that more out there so people give themselves permission to take off that facade and share their story?
So I love you just said a mouthful, and I want to sort of unpack it a little bit. To answer your question, I think doing exactly what you're doing, exactly what I'm doing. And it took me a while to get to that point. Even after I sort of healed myself, I thought, okay, I did that. I'm so proud of myself. I feel so much better. I truly do feel whole, have an amazing family, like an amazing relationship with my husband, with my daughter, with my mom. Everything was good. I don't need to tell anybody. So, but then just like you said, I would reveal little bits and pieces, and I'd have someone say, oh, you know, they'd start crying, and it's like, I pray every day that God will do for my life what he's done for yours. If you can do it, I can do it. I'm like, she doesn't even know. Like, she doesn't even know like the tip of the iceberg. So what if she really knew? Like, how much hope would she have if she really knew? And so I just started to like play with that idea. And pretty soon my uncle the same uncle taught me this other concept, because I still had the same thought you did. You touched on it. If they really knew me, they couldn't love me.
Right.
If they knew the truth, they couldn't love me. No, the truth is, it's you that, when I really unpacked it, it was me that didn't love me. So that's why I couldn't do it.
Thank you. Right.
The reason I couldn't tell it is because I didn't accept me, because I didn't love me. It had nothing to do with anybody else. So that's why I couldn't do it. And finally, I remember working with my uncle one day, and he said, SW, SW, SW. And I'm like, okay, what? He's like, some will, some won't, so what? And I'm like, oh, like it just really hit home. And then I had the privilege of working with Byron Katie one day, and she said something that just always stuck with me. She's like, it's nobody else's job to love you. It's yours. And that always stuck with me too. So I really started meditating on that. I was not put on this planet to be popular. I was put here to make a difference. And so when I really grasped that, I mean, it took time, but when I really grasped that, it made such a huge difference. So telling our story, it was scary. It's scary when you first do it. And I got the exact opposite response that I thought I was going to get. I thought I was going to get so much criticism. Instead, I got so much love, so much acceptance, so many women saying, I'm so grateful to you because you are giving a voice to my struggle. And the truth is, I don't care anymore if people criticize me, because the more you do it, the more you realize it gives you strength. Every time you do it, you have strength. And pretty soon you don't care. You just realize when people criticize you, it really has nothing to do with you.
Tana, you said you have to love yourself. So how did you find that love for yourself?
I used to hate when people said that. I just hated when people say, oh, love yourself. Well, what if you don't love yourself? What if you think you should die? Like, what if you hate yourself? And that's how I felt. So I used to get really irritated when people would say that. But it really is the truth. And so rather than this, like, I think esoteric sort of like pie in the sky idea of loving yourself, I started breaking self-love down into self-care. That I could do. Self-care is a form of self-love. So maybe it's not like waking up in the morning going, oh, you're amazing. You're going to, maybe someday I could do that. But maybe I could just do one thing to take care of myself today. One thing that's going to make a difference in my day that's a positive thing. And if I can do that, maybe I can do a second thing. And if I can't do any of those things, maybe I can do something to help someone else. Like for me, that's where I had to start. And then that just builds. Like, it's honestly, it's like a muscle. It's like when you go to the gym. I had to start with 3-pound weights. You know, now I can lift all kinds of heavy weight. So now it's like, now I'm fit, but you don't get fit by doing it once. You don't start off doing it heavier, you get hurt, right? So I started slow, and it's like, I just need to focus on self-care. And I didn't even really realize that is self-love.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your mother, who has been your biggest cheerleader, who is an entrepreneur by all means. Where was your mother during your childhood when you were growing up? And was there ever any type of resentment that you had against her for what was happening to you? And perhaps, like many of our parents, many of the times they're oblivious to what's going on in our world, particularly with the generation of your parents and my parents, you know, that there was very little communication between children and parents. Parents believed that their job and responsibility was to be providers and to take care of the household, but there was zero communication. Obviously, you don't have that kind of relationship with your daughter. I don't have that relationship with my son. We have an open line of communication about everything and anything. But I didn't have that communication with my father. And today I wish that I did. Today I wish that I did. And like yourself, like you have spoken, I've forgotten my parents for what happened. That was not my choice. I had no right judging them. I just didn't know any better at the time. But where was your relationship with your mother when you were growing up? Where was she at this time? I know she's a hardworking woman. I know that she made a lot of sacrifices for you, but where was she and how's your relationship with her today?
You're the only person that's asked that. In all the interviews I've done, you're the only person, because she really does come across as the hero in the book. And in many ways she was, but in some ways she wasn't. And so you were the only person to sort of pick up on that so far. And that's really interesting. I adore my mom. We are very close. She is a handful. That woman is intense. But she wasn't there because she was a 16-year-old runaway. She never finished high school. She was poor. She lived on the street for a while. So when my dad left, my mom was busy working 3 jobs. My mom worked 3 jobs to put food on the table. She was determined to make my life better than hers had been. She had come from chaos. There's a reason she ran away at 16. Her life had been worse than mine. So in a lot of ways it had been. But that meant she wasn't home. And she left me with a lot of people who, left a lot of opportunity for me to be hurt. And she also was pretty codependent. She always had this need to fix people, and she'd bring people who were not safe into our house. I didn't recognize it when I was young. I didn't recognize that a lot of the bad things happening to me were because of my mom, because she was all I had. So I clung to her. I was so dependent on her. It wasn't until I was an adult, going through therapy, I think, actually healing some of the past, that I started to ask the same question you did. Where was my mom? When all of these things were happening over and over and over again, she'd make good decision, then bad decision, good decision, then bad decision. And for a little while I was going through therapy, I got angry and I was pretty resentful. And I hadn't really had that much of that growing up. I just thought it was sort of her and I against the world. And then I realized, no, she wasn't paying attention. And she had a really bad picker when it came to men. The woman chose men like Custer chose fights. And so that really left a lot of opportunity for a young girl to get into trouble. And so when going through therapy, I had this revelation. It's like, my mom wasn't the superhero I thought she was. And I got angry and resentful for a while. And then, like you, I came full circle. I was able to start to see my mom through a different lens. And that's what we sort of do at Amen Clinics. We help people see things through a different lens. It's really easy to call people bad. It's harder to ask why. And so, I was that wounded child that was angry at her for a while. But now as an adult, as I have an adult's perspective, after I went full circle, I could see it through an adult's perspective. I could now ask better questions. I could take responsibility. And so in being able to do that, I started to ask, the right questions. What was my mom's childhood like growing up? What was her biology, her psychology like? Her thinking like? What was her social support like? What was her spiritual walk like? Because if you can see someone through those 4 circles, you begin to see their behavior through a different lens. I did the same thing with my dad. And then I realized all that anger and resentment was hurting nobody but me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But now we're friends.
Yeah, let's talk about, you talked about 4 circles a minute ago, but let's talk about the 4 cornerstones that you use as a metaphor at the end of the day in one of the interviews again, and that is if we are unbalanced in one of those areas, we are going to be balanced with our being.
Right.
But if we are unbalanced in more than one of those areas, then we're wrecked to happen. So tell us a little bit about that metaphor that you use. What are those 4 cornerstones, and how do we maintain those balance?
So you're actually referring to exactly what I'm talking about right now. I'll go into it a little bit more.
Sure.
So those 4 circles are the foundation. So the biology, which is your brain and your body. What's going on with your brain and your body? Most people forget about the brain, but there's a lot of things that affect the brain. So it could be a head injury, it could be Lyme disease, it could be toxic exposure, right? It could be COVID, it can be chemotherapy or hormone imbalance. Lots of things affect you from a physiological standpoint. Then there's the psychology. What's your thinking like? Are you disciplining your thoughts? Because your thoughts lie, they lie a lot. How much control do you have over that? Are you challenging your thoughts and managing your mind? Then there's the social circle. Who you hang out with matters, right? It matters a lot because people are contagious. As you know, if you are a recovering alcoholic, but you're hanging out in a bar, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Right? So you need to be hanging out with people who are contagious. Their behaviors are contagious. You're going to pick up on their habits because you are going to pick up on their habits. And then there's the spiritual circle. So what gives your life meaning and purpose? I'm sure people listening right now, not everyone believes in God. I'm not here to judge anybody or change anyone's belief system, but people who are purposeful, who believe in something bigger than themselves, live longer and have more joy. So that is important. That's actually studies that show that. So whatever that thing is that you need to, that's beyond you, it's really important. So the biology, the psychology, the social circle, and the spiritual circle. And I think of them like 4 tires on a car. If one of the tires goes flat, the car will drive for a little while, but eventually it's not going to drive so well. But if more than one of those tires are flat, they get low in one area, that car's going to crash. So at one point in my life, and probably a lot of people listening to you, all of my tires were flat. My car flipped.
Mine did too.
Right? So you have a blowout, and that happens, and it just, and so now I pay attention. What's going on in those 4 circles in my life? What's going on with those tires? How's my car driving? I pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, you have the ability with Dr. Amen to be able to take care of one area, the brain area. Okay, but aside from that, for the average, excuse me for the inappropriate use of word, but for the individual that may not have the resources or the access to, what are some simple tools that we can use to maintain the well-being of those 4 areas?
So these 4 circles are what we actually would do for you if you came to see us, even if you didn't have a scan. So not everybody gets a scan. And we know that a lot of people listening to us, are never coming in for a scan. One thing you can do is find out what sort of brain type you have, and you don't have to have a scan to sort of get an idea. Scan's always like super clear, but you can go to something we created for that reason, brainhealthassessment.com. So brainhealthassessment.com, it'll help tell you, do you think, is your brain working a little too hard? Is it a little sleepy? Are you having trouble concentrating? It's really going to give you sort of an idea through this questionnaire, what's going on with you. That's one way. Also, getting your important numbers checked. So if you just do nothing else other than go get your labs checked, if you've got insurance and you can do that, go get your important numbers checked. Know what's going on with your vitamin D. It makes a difference. Your thyroid makes a difference, right? Your nutrition, that kind of stuff makes a difference. But then these other things, we actually work on all those circles as well. So even in my new book, I talk a lot about it. Byron Katie's work is really helping you manage your mind. So having a system for helping you question your thoughts and turn them around. When you're a teenager, most teenagers are really good at talking, even 2-year-olds are really good at talking back to their parents. You got to get good at that again with your thoughts. When you have negative thoughts, write them down, challenge them. You got to get good at that. So I go in detail into how that worked for me when I was going through my process using Byron Katie's work. And we have something called Kill the Ants, automatic negative thoughts. Your social circle, you are, going to church. going to Alcoholics Anonymous, finding a social support system that helps you. So during this time, church is important to me. It helps me because I can be intense and get into this negative place in my head. Church helps me, but I can't go right now. So I joined an online Zoom prayer group. And that's just my place that I go, that I'm able to really help, stay grounded. So doing it with intention is important. And then of course your spiritual circle. So we would tell you the same thing if you came to see us. We would help you work on those 4 circles.
So let's touch on something you said a minute ago. You still go into that negative place.
Of course.
Okay, so how is it that you are able to get the signals? When do you know that you're in a negative place? What do you look for? How is it that you identify that?
So I'm able to bust myself much quicker now. So I know if I'm starting to go into a funk. So I'm terrified of ever going back to that really dark place again. That place where I was really depressed, So
Sure.
If I wake up and I'm not feeling quite right, the first thing I do is question, what am I thinking about? What's going on? And if it's not really my thought process, then it's like, okay, what have I been eating? Have I been exercising? Like, I pay attention. So I just start questioning. I start asking myself a series of questions. What have your thoughts been like? What have you been eating? Have you been exercising? But I notice it's really about being mindful. And so one of the gifts in my, for my new book, I've got pre-order gifts. If you go to relentlesscourage.com, I want people to start writing the story of their life. So I created this package to help you do that, to see the past hurt through adult eyes, not children's eyes. So you reprocess it. And one of the gifts is a mindfulness audio. So you pay attention to what's happening in your body, because awareness is half of the battle. I practice martial arts, and awareness is how you stay out of a fight, right? Awareness is how you stay out of a bar. Awareness is how you avoid problems. So just being aware of what's happening. Most of us never stop during the day and are like, what's happening in my body? How am I feeling? What's going on? Just check in. What's going on? And then question. So what did I eat? How did I sleep? Make sleep a priority. What are the thoughts happening? Right now, it's so easy to go to that dark place. If you just turn on the news, I'll be screaming at the TV in 5 minutes. So I just can't. I know better. Don't turn the TV on. I don't turn the news on. So those are the things. And it's just about being aware. And that's why I created that mindfulness audio for that reason.
Right.
Just check in.
So tell us a little bit more about your book and where can people find it?
So it's the relentless courage of a scared child. It's how persistence, grit, and faith created a reluctant healer. How many of us feel called to help the people in our lives that we left for a reason? We don't want to help, but we feel like we have to help, right? That's the reluctant healer part. But you can find it at relentlesscourage.com. And I've got almost $500 worth of gifts. Like I just said, there's a course, there's a mindfulness audio. There is the 4 circles exercise we just talked about, a 1-page miracle. And I'm matching all pre-order sales. I'm actually donating books to people in need. So we've already identified Salvation Army and Laura's House for abused women and different places like that for people in need. But if you go to relentlesscourage.com, you can download those gifts, and I would be so grateful.
Where can people find you?
So I'm on social media answering questions a lot in my community. I love looking at the questions. So at Tana Amen for Instagram, or Tana Amen BSNRN on Facebook.
Tana Amen, the author of
The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.